Good day, everybody. Hope everyone's having a fantastic week thus far. My name is Greg Huffman, and welcome to the latest edition of the Mind in America podcast. We're going to do something a little bit different today. Obviously, I'm the new co-host of Mind in America, and because we now have two hosts, it gives me the great opportunity and honor to interview and get to know my co-host, Janet Lee Sheriff, a little bit better. So in today's episode, we're going to go through Janet's background, a little bit about why she started the Mind in America podcast, and some of the other initiatives she's got on the go right now. So Janet, welcome to your own podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really excited for this. This is going to be, I think it's going to be really fun. So, anyway, we are going to start off with our mining minutes segment, where we talk a little bit about, a feature of mining that has had some positive impact on the community in which the various companies operate. And this was a really interesting one that we came across just over the last couple of days. There was an article out of Brazil about the reappearance of one of the largest land mammals in South America. It's the South American tapir. And basically, the thought was that this species had become extinct. It hadn't been identified in the wild in over 100 years. And then through a joint venture between the state park in Rio de Janeiro state and Vale, the large international mining company for monitoring wildlife, they've actually identified one of these South American tapirs on the camera. So if there's one, there's more. So this is something that's pretty fantastic and really has stemmed from the result of and collaboration on the environmental front between mining company and the government state agencies. So that's something we wanted to highlight. Just great news. And if anyone's interested, perhaps we can post the link in our show notes. So anyway, with that, let's dive right in. So Janet, really excited for this. As maybe before we get into, why the podcast, let's have everyone learn a little bit more about your background. Perhaps let's start off. Where were you born? Where did you grow up and go to school? And what did you study once you got to university?
Well, thanks for having me today, Greg.
Absolutely.
It's a weird position to be in on the receiving end of the interview. So this is, I'm loving it. And also, congrats to Vale for doing some amazing work and getting those cameras going and the new discovery. That's fabulous news. Love to see companies do amazing things in the community. I was born in Ottawa. I always like to tell people that I am a dual citizen. I live in the U.S. now, so I'm Canadian by birth and American by choice, and proud. But grew up in Ottawa. Moved a lot when I was a kid. Lived in Vancouver for a while. Probably, I think I changed schools between kindergarten and graduation of high school 13 times.
Wow.
And but I fell in love with the mountains out west. And so my goal after graduation from university was to go west. I worked for a while, went to Queen's University, studied economics, and after that worked in Kingston, and then decided to go to the Yukon, which is a story in itself.
And maybe before we get to the Yukon, one aspect of your time in Kingston and after you graduated from Queens, I remember you mentioning that you actually worked for Empire Life, an asset manager. Maybe talk a little bit about that and how you got into that and what you learned from that experience.
Yeah, so I worked, that was my first job out of university after being a waitress. And I put myself through school with a part-time job constantly. I worked for the TD Bank and for a couple of restaurants and bars in Kingston. And Empire Financial hired me. And I was working there, and they started this new system where they wanted to do very intensive interviews. It's hiring the right person. I'll use the actuarial science. Hiring the director of actuarial science is a very difficult task because you need somebody that understands and is an actuary, but also can manage a department with 50 people in it. So they came up with this really interesting 8-hour test that they wanted to implement for senior management positions. So I was one of the guinea pigs that went through this 8-hour test. And it really was, and it wasn't a test you could lie on. It was like everything, manipulating blocks, doing mazes, finishing grammatical sentences. Um, and at the end, the psychologist gives an assessment to you about what your strengths and weaknesses are, and where you should and shouldn't be in your career, and if you're right for the positions they're looking for. It was a fabulous tool. It worked successfully in hiring for some very technical yet managerial jobs. But when he did my assessment, he said I had some real oddities. And one of my oddities was in these mazes, which were 8.5 by 11 pages, 13 of them. And you had to go and complete the maze. And he said, you never took the pencil off the paper. And he said, I actually got a magnifying glass out, and I looked, and I was trying to see where you stopped to think about which way to go, and you never did. So, and you did them in record time. He said, so how did you do them? And I said, well, I did them in my head first. And I said, doesn't everybody do that? And he said, no, that's how people work. So what he told me about myself was that I was a very logical, strategic person, that I thought things through. I canceled out options in my head and looked for the best path forward. And he encouraged me to quit my job and go to law school. And I told him I didn't want to go to law school. So he told me that I should be in strategic planning and policy, and move up the ladder and to take advantage of those roles. His brother was my boss. So, so I went in and I told my boss that, the psychologist had just told me I should quit my job. Um, and I did. He was right. It wasn't the right job for me. And, and that's when I had this brainstorm that I should move to the Yukon and pay off my student loan, which then dramatically changed the course of my life.
That's an excellent, excellent backstory and segue into the Yukon. So yeah, so the move to the Yukon, you're gone through Empire Financial after graduating, and then all of a sudden, boom, aptitude test, and we're off to the Yukon. So what really, obviously, you talked about the love of the mountains, but what really, obviously you spent some time growing up in British Columbia as well, but why the Yukon? What was the draw there?
There's a magazine called Flair Magazine that was popular at the time, and one of my colleagues was reading it at lunch, and I was about to go for my lunch break from Empire Financial, and I asked if I could borrow her magazine for something to read at lunch, and there was an article about opportunities for women in Yellowknife, and I looked at the salary ranges that they were paying, and I thought, if I went to Yellowknife, I could pay off my student loan in a year, and I could come back and continue on my path. My mother had informed me that I was going to Bay Street when I graduated from Queens. So I, I guess that's where I thought I was going. So I started talking to people. I didn't know anyone in Yellowknife, but I knew the Chief Justice in Whitehorse. He had been a law professor at Queens. And so I called he and his wife and asked them what they thought, because they had recently moved there. And I I went. I knew like three people there, and the brother of a friend in Kingston. The brother of my friend happened to eventually be the premier of the Yukon, and has become a lifelong friend. But yeah, I went up to the Yukon. I didn't have a job. My grandmother, I guess I backtrack. My family, no, I'm known for hating winter. And so my family laughed, and they had a bet that I'd last 6 months. My grandmother, who was my mentor and my best friend, bought me a one-way ticket and said, this is really good for you, and you should go and don't come back. Like, there's a whole new world out there that it's all yours. And I didn't understand the importance of the one-way ticket at the time, but she really was setting me free to go and be something completely different than I thought possible. Um, so I didn't have a job. I ended up getting a job in Faro, which was at the time the largest open pit lead zinc mine in the world. And I had never lived in a mining town. And so I came out of beautiful spring in Kingston and walked into Faro, which the town burnt down. They built the town, and 6 months after it burned, they built the town. It burned down. So there's a huge fire kill area. There's a strike on at the mine. There's picket lines, um, and I cried, and I thought I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But I was going to stay 1 year so I could win the bet and pay off my student loan.
I love it. So you said 1 year to pay off your loan. Your family took the under, no
Yeah.
more than 6 months, and your grandmother is like, no, this is a long-term thing. I love it. I love it. That's great. So you're settling down in Faro, wondering what the heck you've done with your life. What role or what sort of employment? What were the stuff that you got into initially while you're in Faro?
I started working for the Yukon government, and I think I was one of the few people in Faro that didn't work at the mine or in a affiliated or company that benefited from the mine. There's maybe 5 government employees, a nurse, social worker, a liquor store, me. So I did community economic development work between Faro and an indigenous community, First Nation community, about 30 minutes away called Ross River, which became a life-altering experience for me and shaped me forever. Um, and so I would work with small businesses and community endeavors to try and get some activity going. I think the best thing that happened to me, two amazing things happened to me from Faro. I was able to have a very unique experience living in a company town. It was a municipality, but it only existed and was built because of the mine. And there's been a lot of knocking of Faro because of environmental issues, but people have forgotten the upside of Faro. There was 100% employment. There was, if you didn't work, you weren't there. There was no reason to be there. It was healthy. When they were on strike, when I arrived, they did what was called a 6 and 3 shift, where they did 3 days, three 12-hour days, 3 12-hour nights, 3 days off. It was very good for transient workers because they made a lot of money. But the company wanted families, and the strike resulted in a change of shift work to what's called 4 and 4. Two 12-hour days, 2 12-hour nights, 4 days off. So what happened was the whole population of the town changed, and it went to families. And people circulated all their money. They would go camping and hunting and fishing on their days off with their families. One paycheck family supported the family. There was an amazing school with incredible teachers. We had a company paid doctor and nurse with full medical facilities. The social problems didn't exist. The RCMP, it was the favorite posting of the RCMP. Social problems only existed when the mine was on layoffs or strike. There were domestic violence didn't exist. It was I was able to see what happens when there's 100% employment because of a mine and watch the money circulate. That was one of the two great benefits. The other great benefit was the opportunity to meet the women in Ross River and be embraced by the community, which then set off a 25-year relationship. And they welcomed me in because I respected their culture. I had never been in a First Nation community. I asked a lot of stupid questions that probably people didn't ask. I went to topics that probably people didn't ask. But with that, they really, uh, and again, say the word embrace, but just gave me the opportunity to learn. And they decided that I was teachable. And that started my work in the First Nation community.
That's amazing. I hadn't made that connection about, sort of your introduction into Ross River community. So, and maybe we could talk a little bit more. So, what were you doing with the community? What sort of initiatives and activities were you as sort of the government representative, working with the local community?
Um, so the first thing that they did was they brought in somebody to teach me how to work with the community. So was a woman that was from another First Nation community called Old Crow, and she brought me in and introduced me to some of the women, and really, I don't know if I did anything other than talk to people and figure out what it is they wanted and what were their issues. Um, I was told, don't expect the chief to talk to you for a year. Um, take it step by step, spend a lot of time talking to people, drink a lot of tea, just keep showing up. And so that's when I learned that the first thing you do is you keep showing up and you keep showing up and do a lot of listening and not a lot of talking. The answers will come. So mostly I spent my time with the women of the community, just trying to figure out why there was 100% employment in Faro and there was 100% unemployment 30 minutes down the road. Why is this happening? And what do we do to fix this? And they were the ones that gave me the answers and then became the ones that told me to go into the mining industry with this information they acquired. So the government really paid me to become educated on how to do business better from the private sector. And that's one of the things that I know I'm watching this talk right now about, and maybe we are overstaffed in government, but watch these cuts coming in government. But I think, there's a public service to many of these jobs that if you manage it right, you take all that knowledge in the private sector and everybody's better for it. So I view what I did was more of my public service. I became educated and then took that knowledge with their blessing from the community into the mining sector eventually.
That's amazing. So you're acting as almost a liaison between First Nations community and government and industry and being able to work towards getting everyone onto the same page on specific initiatives.
Yeah, pretty much. The government of the time at the Yukon was run by a gentleman named Tony Pennicott, who was the premier. He was NDP, and he believed he was an exceptionally bright man. I don't know where he is right now, but he believed in decentralization. He didn't like all the government services sitting in one place in Whitehorse. He wanted to see health services led from one community, mining led from another, and so he was huge on conversation. And so he wanted to see certain types of these jobs in the community. So we were talking to the community. And that time I view as when I really started to learn, how do you figure out what communities want when they see these industry projects and what is the real truth? Because the real truth of what you hear is not what I heard. I heard women saying that they want mining. They want it done right, but they want the men to have these jobs. They want them to be healthy. They want them to bring, these paychecks home. They want to see their grandchildren educated, and all of this comes from having a healthy private sector. Those were the messages I heard, not the messages that you eventually start, getting distorted. So I think that's probably the best gift they gave me.
That's excellent. And you were the founder of the Yukon Mint. Do you maybe want to talk a little bit about how that sort of fit into the picture?
Yeah, so that started, and I still have the trademark in the U.S., Yukon Mint, and I still have plans for it. But I was running a project in the Casca Nation territory, and I was trying to find ways that we could involve different parts of the community. This is many years later. This is like 25 years later. I'm back in their territory. I've gone away. I've come back, and I'm trying to find ways to include the community. So I did what I was taught in my first days back in Ross River. I go to the community, I just listen. And what I heard led me to form the Yukon Mint because I was trying to find a way for the artists to get involved. And so we formed the Mint. We started running contests. We were doing a pilot project with the bulk sample. We had a plant. It was all water and gravity, non-chemical. So we started, well, let's take this. Why are we sending this gold away? It's just going to go to a refinery and the money's going to come back and that's it. what, being a 2% royalty to the First Nation? Like that's not enough, right? So why don't we go back to recirculating the dollars in the economy? So we ran contests to put indigenous art on the coins. The artists receive money, they receive the coins. We did them in 4 different denominations. And then each year keep running that contest. Um, it was amazing. And the the pride that the artists had when they saw their art on a coin, it was absolutely incredible. And that those types of things lead to more types of things. So to me, it was just doing community engagement in a different way.
No, that's fascinating, and I've seen a few of the coins. They're stunning, very very wonderful pieces of art, and yeah, it's very exciting to hear what's next for that. So we've traversed your time, some of your time in the Yukon. Maybe we should switch gears and you talk about being a dual citizen and talk about the transition into getting involved in mining in the United States of America.
Yeah. So if people don't know, my husband, Bill Sheriff, he's been in gold and uranium, but he's really known for uranium. And we ended up moving down to Idaho. I met Bill. Oh, geez, we've been married 15 years now. Strangely, our anniversary was the day that President Bush was at the opening of Alta Mesa, and I forgot it was our anniversary. He even did a layup. He even asked me if I was married to Bill and totally forgot it was our anniversary. So, but we moved to Idaho first. We decided that we were going back into uranium. We're still doing the gold. Initially formed Tigris Uranium, and which became enCore Energy. This all follows Bill's previous life with Energy Metals and Uranium One. So I was the first CEO of Tigris, which then became enCore, and Dennis Stover took it on. And really, as you know, Greg, sat and waited for the uranium sector to come back. Like you had the run up, '04 to '06 kind of era. But we formed enCore. We had a bunch of stuff lined up. Fukushima hit, and then we just kind of hunkered down and waited. And then it's really Bill. Like Bill saw what was coming. He saw the timing and started acquiring assets when nobody wanted them, and led to enCore. So I became very well educated on nuclear and ISR through Bill and Dr. Stover. Dr. Stover, one of the founders of the in situ technology that we use at enCore. I'm not with enCore now, but I still say we. I'm a shareholder. Um, he spent so much time with me, teaching me everything, and I just became a convert. I love the technology. I think it's a huge part of our future in the United States.
It 100%. And obviously I learned a lot. We share that. We both learned a lot about the uranium industry from Bill, and very thrilled to be working with him on the nuclear fuel side of things right now. So but maybe while we're on the topic of Bill, how is working with Bill? Obviously, I know I'm in a professional capacity, I'm in a professional and a personal capacity. How does that working relationship really operate? What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the learnings that you guys have taken away from working so closely together?
Yeah, I have to say that I love working with Bill. Bill, and this. Bill is a very high level thinker. When I was working up north, they would always call Bill an eagle because he flew so high. And when you have an eagle that flies so high, you need somebody on the ground that's doing all the work, running through the forests. But the eagle is telling you where you're going, and the wolf is grinding it out on the ground. So I'm the wolf, and Bill needs wolves, right? He needs people like you and like me that can take his vision and implement and execute his vision. He is Yeah, I always joke, Bill's running down the road 1,000 miles an hour and he's throwing stuff over his shoulder and I'm catching it behind him. When my arms are full, he's incredibly good about stopping and letting me catch up. Because at times he gets so excited and so he has so many ideas that you have to kind of, okay, all of us back here are getting a little tired. So just give us a couple of months, catch up, and then we're off again. Um, I think, I know it's not common. There are lots of couples that work together. I know one of my colleagues, Maud, her parents work together and do so very well. I think family run business that way, you work harder, you've got a common goal, you have to set boundaries, like after 6, nobody's on the computer, it's dinner time, watch a movie, walk the dogs. It set boundaries like that. But those are when you have your strategic conversations. But the hard work that's at the desk, that has limits. I find one of the unfortunate things is some people don't understand that um, working together is actually more beneficial than apart. And they look at the negatives, and what related parties and issues like that you have to protect and you have to cover off. But there is such a value to being a close working unit. Um, but you have to have that time where you're not.
Definitely, it's important to have that separation and boundary. But maybe you talked about Tigris and the evolution into enCore. Maybe talk a little bit about your role from a communications perspective at enCore, as well as the other corporate entities that you've been involved with, because it's something that I've learned a lot from you in the time that we've been working together. Sort of, obviously came a lot from your background and time spent listening and then implementing in the Yukon, but maybe talk a little bit about how you transition that into the corporate world.
Yeah, I was a CEO of a public company 5 or 7 years, I can't remember, and I was a VP before that. Um, I loved it. I do it again, but it's enCore came along and started growing so fast that it needed somebody. I tried to find somebody to do it, and I couldn't find somebody that kind of met those standards I was looking for. So I ended up taking on the job, which I think was beneficial that I had all this other background, that I understood how government worked, that I understood um, how a C-suite level person, what they need from a communications person. And, working with people like Dr. Stover, who are very accepting of the relationship to Bill, really gave me a lot of runway to work with. So I ended up staying in enCore in the communications role, and I loved it. But it kept growing, and the company kept getting bigger. So what I started doing was I wanted to find other ways to start communicating, because I wasn't really a big fan of let's put out a news release and go to a couple of conferences. I have very strong opinions on how many conferences you go to and how you can communicate. So we started getting more into social media. And this is where my team came in, because they're younger and smarter about social media. But one day I just thought it would be fun to start a podcast. And it's nobody, I come up with these ideas and nobody ever stops me. And I've never started a podcast. I wrote a children's book at one point. I never wrote a children's book before, but nobody stops you and you just figure it out. So I started a podcast, and initially I started it in Newfoundland because I was also working with other companies, like yours. I work with your company, but I was working with a company in Newfoundland, and so I started there because I really wanted to hear from the people in the community and the companies, and I wanted to have people not just give me a 20-minute corporate presentation. I wanted people to see that the mining industry is full of real people and they have real stories, and get to know them, so then you can decide, is this the kind of person I want to invest in or not? And so then it grew from Newfoundland to I was kind of running out of people to talk to, because what I found with the mining industry is people really kind of duck and cover a lot. They don't want to be public. They don't want to raise attention. They just want to do their job. They don't, want to compromise their permits. And so I was really struggling and trying to figure out where to go from this. So I started doing some research for a podcast. So I got into the U.S. Geological Survey annual reports. And I started, and there's a whole long story in this one, but I'll keep it brief. Um, I started looking, I went back to the 50s because I kind of went down a rabbit hole and I started seeing how much the United States used to produce domestically from all metals. And I saw what we produce here now. And it's like a tenth of what we used to. It used to be like 300 and something $billion a year. Now it's like $36 billion a year. And that includes sand and gravel. And I thought there's a problem here. So I started going back to figure out where the problem was, which then led me to, well, why don't I do a podcast about mining in America and try to show people how great it is and how much we need it and what it does for communities. Because all you have to do is drive around the United States and see all these rural communities drying up to realize that's what we used to have. We used to have these high paying jobs in these communities all over the place. And this has gone and moved offshore and we need it back. So can I offer a little bit of information or knowledge to people about the mining industry and the people involved in it to maybe get people to think, maybe it's okay to have more mining here. Maybe we can go from 36 billion a year to, I don't know, let's try and get 120 billion. Let's get 350 again. And so I started it, and the whole premise was I don't get paid, they don't get paid. This is just get to know me, get to know the sector. And then of course the natural was, well, now let's talk about nuclear. So the focus right now is I want to talk about nuclear. I want people to get to know about it. And it's really just my little bit to try and get more mining in America.
You know what, I'm a big podcast believer. I think it's an excellent forum for communicating views and ideas and just overall information and listen to a lot of the different mining podcasts. And it's really quite unique in terms of what you've done with Mind in America in terms of the focus and both talking about the mining aspects, but then also about the social cultural aspects of it as well and sort of the positive impacts that it has. And obviously we've had some great guests just in the last couple of weeks, and very excited to see who else we're able to get lined up here. Hopefully we're able to do some really great interviews with out of town people who are in Toronto for the upcoming Prospectors and Developers Conference. So that'll be so.
And I want to say something because I really, for a while, because from the beginning of this, I've wanted a co-host, and um, I I would have loved to have had Bill, but of course that would have been kind of hokey, the Bill and Janet show, right? So, Bill accepts that. He's going to be a guest. You and I have talked about this. Bill's dying to get on here and talk. But I wanted a co-host because I didn't like, I want to have another perspective. I want to have another audience. And so I was so happy when you said yes, because a lot of people said no. I even asked my son at one point, would you do it? And he was like, yeah, that's gonna work. Mom and me on a show. So, good for him for standing his ground. But so I'm very happy you're doing this.
No, I didn't say I have a lot of fun with it and very excited about where we're going to take it. So everyone stay tuned. I'm cognizant of the time, so I wanted to, sort of maybe, just transition from the podcast into some of the other stuff that you've got on the go right now. Obviously, you and Bill share the fact that you're able to have many balls in the air at any one time. So maybe, talk to us a little bit about your work in New Mexico, perhaps both with grants, energy, as well as with the Clean Energy Association of New Mexico.
Yeah, so I do a number of pieces of work for other companies, nuclear fuels, urano. I finished up with enCore, but I have an amazing team that I've put together that puts together these podcasts as well. I couldn't do anything without them. So I'm very fortunate to have a very young, talented, and these are the people that are going to be 20 years from now driving communications in this sector. And that's my goal, is give them all the tools they need to become the new leaders. Um, about a year ago, Craig Bartles from General Atomics approached me. It has long been a dream of mine to work in New Mexico and to work with the Navajo and to bring the knowledge and the approach that I've used because I've negotiated deals up in northern Canada, benefits agreements, cooperation agreements, to bring that to New Mexico because New Mexico is the largest uranium resource in the country, and the nuclear and AI aren't going to happen without New Mexico. And so I started working with Craig under a company called Grants Energy, which has a project near San Mateo and Grants in the Grants Mineral Belt. So I've started working in New Mexico. Very excited. I was just there this week. Wonderful community of San Mateo. I think the whole town came out for the meeting and learning about ISR. They've had a checkered past with uranium, and it's all real and it's all a serious issue you have to talk about. But the new technology with ISR that's in its 50th year, created in the United States and now worldwide, is workable in this region. We started the Clean Energy Association of New Mexico, which is there to help educate the communities on the technology and nuclear. So that's starting up. And then I've got my favorite companies like Nuclear Fuels that we work with to do communications. And it's easy working with people like you because you've got such a great contact list already, and you know what works and what doesn't in the sector. So yeah, it seems like a lot of balls in the air, but with the team, it works. If it was just me and Bill, and that's the other part is people see what Bill does and they think, look at all the stuff Bill does. And sometimes I'm so far behind the scenes they don't realize what what my role is. My team goes through the same thing, right?
Absolutely, no, they're phenomenal to work with. I've really, really enjoyed getting to work with them and get to know them as well. So, one thing that we both also share is a real passion for education. So, maybe talk a little bit about the enCore Educational Society and, sort of, what the idea was and bringing it to fruition and sort of where it's at and where it's going.
Yeah, thank you. Again, it's just looking at community engagement different. I looked at when you do a scholarship or you do a benefits agreement and you say you're going to do a $20,000 scholarship, you write a check and somebody else does it. And I just don't think you're getting the exposure and the profile that you can by doing something that's probably a lot more work, but it's getting your company name out there. So we formed the enCore Education Society, put together a fabulous board. We are just closing in on finalizing the Dr. Dennis Stover Chemical Engineering Scholarship for a master's student at A&M in South Texas. And we do annual scholarships in the communities where we work. But we drive the process. So it's it's better it's better for the company because you're getting out there doing it. It's more work, but I think it's just another different way of doing community engagement. I want to do the same thing in New Mexico. I want to do it in Wyoming. I want to take it, and I've got a vision in my head for how this grows, but it's in its early stages. We're doing our second round of scholarships this year, but the US desperately needs more engineers for the nuclear industry. And mining schools have been cutting back. And we need mining schools. We need more engineers. We need to be churning them out and working in the sector. We lose them to a lot of other sectors. But we also need people that don't want to go to university. We need people that want to be environmental monitors. We need people that want to be radiation safety officers, physicians assistants. There's so many opportunities in this sector, but we need to be planning years out. So we're trying to get in the school system. We get a lot of reach into the schools about the scholarships, but we're also now working in New Mexico with the school board at Grants to try and find a way that we can help contribute from a company perspective with grants and clean energy to create more technician training. Because let's face it, like I don't know what the numbers are, but when I went to school, only 4% of the population of Canada went to university. There's a lot of other people that can do other things.
Absolutely, and we're really excited to roll things out from the enCore Education Society in Wyoming as well. And we're having some of those initial conversations now, both with the University of Wyoming as well as with the local school district in Johnson County, where the Casey project is located. So people are very excited about it. So stay tuned on that front. Do you think we probably should wrap up here pretty shortly, Janet? But I do have one final question. I think we started it last episode, and we'll continue on the trend. Just to get to know our interviewees a little bit better, if you could go anywhere in the world with a loved one, maybe Bill, maybe not, where would it be and why?
Can I take my whole family?
Yes.
Okay. I want to take my whole family. I have a new granddaughter, my first one. I won't name
Congratulations.
her. She's got a privacy. I want to keep her life private, but um, I want to take her to the Galapagos, and I want to take my
Uh,
whole family. I went there once. It's the most incredible place I've ever been. Um, yeah, it was the only time I ever went somewhere and I cried when I left because I didn't want to leave. So I've got this thing that I want to take my granddaughter there when she's old enough that she can remember it. So she's a bit young. She's only 10 months now. And Bill can come.
Bill can
And
come
my
too. That's
and my daughter, my son, and their partners, and yeah. But
wonderful.
that's where I want to go.
Wonderful pick. No, that's great. I'm sure it'll happen. So anyway, Janet, huge thank you for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. Very excited to keep things rolling with Mine in America. And with that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.